soft landing or hard time for house prices? We ask our experts how low property values will go.
I don't want to spoil it for you, but I'm going to tell you that they're going to interview two leading economists in Australia, and they're going to have very different opinions on what's ahead for property market in Australia. However, I'm going to have you guess, it's going to be an easy guess, which one of these economists works for a financial institution or a bank that has a lot more mortgages on their books, meaning that it is in their interest to call the property market as soft landing as opposed to bursting. Also, one of these economists has been really prominent in trying to prognosticate the future of the Australian housing, and he's changed his tune, very, very interestingly changed his tune. I think you're going to like this. Here it is. You tell me what you think.
House prices are on the slide, but the debate's on over how deep the current downturn will be. The Sydney market is down 8% from last year's peak, while Melbourne has fallen around 5%. And the latest housing finance numbers suggest things are likely to get worse, with borrowers less willing or able to get loans. The chairman of the National Australia Bank and the former head of Federal Treasury, Ken Henry, says the Sydney and Melbourne markets are in a softening period, but won't have a hard landing.
In the 5 years before last year, went up by 73%. In the last 12 months have come back by 6%. So over the 6 years, house prices are still very well elevated. House prices have softened, but we don't foresee anything like a crash in house prices.
But Macquarie Bank has issued a dire forecast, saying the housing market is in the worst downturn in nearly 40 years. And joining me to discuss is Shane Oliver from AMP Capital and Alan Oster from the NAB. Shane, I might start with you. You called a similar, almost doomsday prediction, according to some of the housing market, a prediction of a peak-to-trough move in Sydney and Melbourne of 20% down. Now, this would be the worst housing fall in 40 years. Does the evidence that you've been seeing recently reinforce that view, or is it getting even worse?
It at least reinforces it, but at the back of my mind I do worry that it's getting even worse. One of the indicators that I love to look at is auction clearance rates in Sydney and Melbourne on a Saturday night when they come out, and if anything they've been deteriorating, notwithstanding last weekend was a Melbourne Cup holiday in Melbourne. But if you look at the underlying trend there, it's going down. We were sort of in the high 40% numbers. We seem to be heading into the low 40% numbers in terms of the clearance rate. That is consistent with the rate of decline in prices actually accelerating. And then when you put that together with housing finance figures for September, which came out today, which are again extremely weak, continuing to slide, ongoing anecdotes of tightening lending standards. Next year we're going to have comprehensive credit reporting, which will make it easier for the banks to check on who's got multiple loans and they're not telling us about.
Comprehensive credit reporting, this is something I haven't heard about. So next year we're going to have comprehensive credit reporting, where banks will be able to exchange each other's notes type thing and find out exactly what loans you have, who with and how much, meaning that you won't be able to hide loans if you have it with one institution from another institution that you're potentially trying to get finance from. So that's another nail in the coffin. And now Shane Oliver obviously is one of these economists. For the record, I think he said the peak to trough, he was predicting 15 to 20%, and then the media likes to quote the upper number, so 20%, but let's see what he says now. It looks like he might be revising his prognosis of 15 to 20% to something else.
All these sorts of things, I think, are actually putting more and more downwards pressure on prices. So yes, my base case is 20% top to bottom fall, but I'd have to say the risks, if anything, are tilting a little bit to something a bit worse than that.
Is there not anything in the most recent data that Shane's referred to, Alan, that's giving you pause for thought on this issue? It does appear that things are plateauing. They seem to be getting worse and worse, and those auction clearance rates would suggest there's still a lot of downward price pressure to come. Aren't you starting to get a little bit more concerned?
Short answer is not. No.
Okay, now Alan Oster, he is a chief economist at NAB, right? NAB has a lot of business loans, but like every other bank, their bread and butter is mortgages. So what do you think Alan's employer will want him to say? He said no, he doesn't think it'll crash, but let's see how he defends it.
I think if you look at the actual, and CoreLogic put out essentially weekly house price data, but if you look at, say, their monthly data and you look at what's been happening in the annualised growth rates, the way I look at it, look at the last 6 months, annualise the growth rate. In Sydney a couple of months ago it was -10, today it's -5. So I'm sort of in the, when I actually look at what you sold your price for, it doesn't seem to me that it's continuing to collapse. It seems to be, if anything, bottoming me out a bit. And I go back to fundamentals and I say three things matter: supply, demand, interest rates, and do you have a job? And the level of unemployment that causes a lot of grief is basically around 8%. So to me, what you've got is a postcode issue. And now a general slowdown, fine. Not helping the economy, yes, but you need to put it in a bit of context.
It's called misdirection, postcode issue. Obviously, the prices will not rise or fall exactly the same in all the postcodes. So you can always argue that, oh, it depends on the postcode. Of course it depends, but where's the trend going? It's misdirection what he's doing right now.
Shane, Oliver, the numbers today would suggest that this is spreading. Previously, it seemed to be mainly confined to the investor market, but the numbers today suggest owner-occupiers also down over 11%. That's in addition to investor lending down 18%. How bad do you think this will get, and when do you feel like this cycle will end?
I think it will continue until 2020. I think we've got another 2 years of pain in the housing markets in Sydney and Melbourne. Now, of course, if everything came down faster all at once, then it would probably end quicker. But at the moment, I can't see what's going to bring it to an end. Don't forget, on the way up, we had this thing called FOMO. First-time buyers got in, investors got in for fear of missing out. Investors were saying, well, last year it did 10%, the year before that was 8%, let's project those numbers off into the future. Now, of course, as prices come down for first-time buyers, it's not such a big issue. But if you're an investor, you're getting a net rental yield there of maybe 1 or 2%. You really need decent capital growth to stay in that property, to make the investment stack up. But if you're seeing prices come down and that goes on for too long, then you start thinking, well, gee whiz, maybe I should be getting out of here. And FOMO, fear of missing out, becomes FONGO, fear of not getting out. That's the big worry here, that it starts to build on itself on the way down. Now, I'm with Alan in the sense that I'm not forecasting a crash here. 20% sounds bad, but it just takes us back to where we were in the first part of 2015. So I'm not talking about a full-on crash here, because I don't see a massive rise in interest rates and I don't see a huge rise in unemployment. But I do think we've got a lot further to go from here. The other aspect, of course, is there is a chance of a change of government. Some would say a very good chance. The change there would bring less access to negative gearing and a reduced capital gains tax discount. Now, investors who at one point were 40-odd% of the market, still fairly significant players in the market, if you're thinking of investing today, you've also got to think about who you might sell to 5-10 years down the track. Now, your pool of buyers won't be there like it was a few years ago.
Alan, also, you make the case that the economic fundamentals are pretty strong, but doesn't that make it even more worrying that we've actually seen house prices fall as much as they have and continue to fall? Doesn't that suggest there was a lot of speculation in this market? People were buying in, thinking that prices would continue to go up. And as Shane Oliver points out, now that that is not the case, won't we see a lot of people potentially selling their houses off to get out before it gets even worse?
Now, Alan Oster does not believe his story. He does not believe his opinion, in my opinion. And once again, this is not financial advice. This is just my opinion. This is reading the news, reading between the lines, hopefully, and reading people's body language as well. Not that they exactly know what's going to happen, but as the presenter just made a point, is that we haven't had the interest rates go up substantially. We haven't had any unemployment ticking up at all, and the economy is going strong. So why are property prices pulling back? If all this was true, they should be on the upward trend. Instead, they are reducing in prices.
So I'm not trying to downplay things here. I'm just saying you need some perspective, need to understand what's happening. If you tell me that for whatever reason, be it China or Trump or something, we managed to get our unemployment rate up to about 8%, I'll tell you we'll have a double banger recession, because that will then trigger the problem. And you look at the big banks and you see...
Oh, the body language of somebody who's absolutely not convinced with his answer. And by the way, he's not answering the question.
You know, say 60 postcodes we don't like, which is 1% of all postcodes in Australia. It's explaining in the NAB book nearly, or the best part of 40 to 50% of all our bad debts. So it's highly specific to certain postcodes. As we go forward, what are we seeing? We don't see, in any of the big banks' reports, and they've just come out, a significant increase in defaults in the housing book. Maybe it's too early, but we're not seeing it. And so I think, again, not great for consumption. And I think it will slow the economy, because we see the consumer as really weak, and particularly in areas like discretionary retail, where they have the option of buying or not buying. And that slows the economy. But there are other things, as I said before, that are sort of powering it along for a while. So I think you need to be a bit balanced. It's easy to get a headline by saying, you know, house prices are crashing, etc., etc.
You got to put it in the perspective. You need to, you know, he's all over the place. I might not be good in very many things, but I'm very good at listening, and he's not convincing. If anything, he sounds fatigued and not convincing, and he's struggling to put his case forward.
I think from a perspective of, you know, how is this affecting the economy, it's not helping, but I don't think it's hurting a lot either.
The debate goes on. Shane Oliver, thank you for joining the business. Alan Oster, thank you as well.
Thank you.
And just before I let you go, every time we talk about property, it's a residential property. Now, let's have a quick look at CBD office vacancy rates. This is July 2018 figures. They apparently tell a different story.
With a national CBD office space vacancy rate of about 9%, Perth is significantly underperforming, with a rate more than double that, as it continues to recover from its mining high. Brisbane is slightly ahead in its recovery from the mining boom, while Adelaide also has much more office space than it can fill. All the while, Melbourne and Sydney's markets continue to tighten. But no matter the city or its market conditions, one common trend is emerging.
We're seeing businesses, building owners invest in place, invest in the things that make their places, their buildings and properties great places to be at.
Yeah, it's all about the, you know, nice offices, so you want to come to work and be creative and unleash that giant within you, or so goes one of those personal development mantras. I think that'll do for this video. Thanks for watching, and we'll speak again in the next one.